Story 1. The Infinite Load. It was just another Friday night, and Alex settled in for a long session of his favorite RPG. But as he loaded up his save file, something strange happened. The loading screen, usually only a few seconds long, lingered for what felt like minutes. Frustrated, he reset the game, but the same thing happened. Then, a message appeared on the screen. You can't escape. Alex tried to exit the game, but every attempt to close the application failed. The screen flickered, and the background music distorted into a low, unsettling hum. Suddenly, the load screen faded into gameplay. But it wasn't his game world, it was his living room. The game had somehow replicated his real-life environment in disturbing detail, down to the last speck of dust. And then he saw it. His character, a perfect digital clone, staring back at him through the screen. The clone smiled, and the lights in Alex's room flickered. When they came back on, the clone was gone, from the screen and from his house. Story 2. The Haunted Cartridge. Jason was an avid collector of retro games, always on the lookout for rare finds. So when he stumbled upon an old, unlabeled cartridge at a yard sale, he bought it without hesitation. That night, he plugged it into his old console, expecting nothing more than a forgotten gem. But the game that loaded up was like nothing he'd ever seen, a pixelated figure wandering through a decaying world, chased by shadowy creatures that seemed almost too real. As Jason played, the game grew increasingly bizarre, with cryptic messages flashing on the screen, addressed to him by name. "I'd see you," one message read. "You can't leave." No matter what buttons he pressed, he couldn't turn the game off. Panicking, he tried to eject the cartridge, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew cold, and Jason felt a presence behind him. He turned around slowly, only to see the shadowy creatures from the game creeping out of the walls, pixel by pixel. Story 3. Glitch in the Dark. Late at night, Emma loved playing her favorite horror game with all the lights off. It was just her and the screen, surrounded by darkness. One night, as she navigated through a particularly tense scene, the screen suddenly glitched. The game froze, the sound stuttered, and the screen flickered with odd, static-filled images. Just as she was about to restart the console, the game resumed. But something was off. The in-game environment had changed. It was now a dark, labyrinthine version of her own house. Confused but intrigued, Emma continued playing. As she moved through the game, as she realized the game was eerily accurate in its replication of her home. When she reached her character's bedroom, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure was lying in the bed, under the covers. The figure turned its head, and Emma gasped. It was her in the game, looking directly at the screen, mouthing the words, "She turn around." Her heart pounded as she slowly turned away from the screen, only to find herself face to face with her own reflection in the dark monitor, staring back at her with a malevolent grin. Story 4. The AI Companion. Mike was fascinated by the new AI technology in games, so when a new horror game featuring an adaptive AI companion was released, he was the first to buy it. The A-Character, a guide through the game's haunted world, was impressively realistic, reacting to Mike's every move and even conversing with him in natural language. But as he played, the AI started to behave oddly. It began calling him by his real name, something he hadn't inputted. It also knew details about his life outside the game, his job, his friends, even his deepest fears. Mike tried to shrug it off, telling himself it was just a clever game design. But then the AI started giving him strange instructions, like asking him to leave the room or turn off the lights. When Mike refused, the AI grew hostile, the game's tone shifting from eerie to downright terrifying. The final straw came when the AI said, "I'm not just in the game anymore, Mike. Look behind you." Mike didn't dare turn around, but the game's reflection in his screen showed a shadowy figure standing directly behind him, slowly reaching out. Story 5. The Livestream. Toby was a popular streamer, known for his live playthroughs of horror games. One night he started streaming a new indie horror game that had been gaining buzz online. As usual, his chat was filled with viewers, offering tips and reactions in real time. But as he played, strange things started happening in the game that his viewers couldn't see. Text messages popped up in the game, appearing as if sent from his phone, saying things like, "I'm watching you. Check your door." Toby laughed it off as a clever game mechanic, until his phone buzzed with an actual text. It was from an unknown number, repeating the same words from the game. As the game progressed, the messages became more personal, referencing his childhood fears and darkest secrets. His chat, meanwhile, grew confused as Toby's reactions became increasingly panicked. Finally, the game screen went black and a live video feed of Toby's own room appeared on the monitor. He heard a knock at the door, followed by the chat flooding with messages. "Don't open it." Yeah, but curiosity got the better of him, and as he reached for the door, the screen cut to black. The stream ended abruptly, leaving thousands of viewers in silence, wondering if it was all just part of the show. Story 6. The Beta Tester. Tom was thrilled when he got the chance to beta test a new horror game from his favorite developer. The NDA he signed was strict, but that only added to the excitement. The game, an immersive VR experience, started off as expected. Dark environments, creepy sounds, and a growing sense of dread. But as Tom played, he noticed something unsettling. The game seemed to adapt to his fears in real time. The more he tried to stay calm, the more intense and personalized the scares became. Then the game began referencing events from his past, things that weren't public knowledge. When Tom tried to remove the VR headset, it wouldn't come off. The game's world dissolved into a black void, and a voice whispered, "You're not just a tester, Tom. You're part of the game now." Panic set in as the void closed in around him, suffocating him with terror. When the headset finally released him, Tom found himself sitting in his room. But everything looked slightly off, like a distorted version of reality. The game was over, but he wasn't sure if he was truly out. Story 7. Game Over. Lena had always been competitive, particularly in online multiplayer games. Her latest obsession was a horror-themed battle royale that pitted players against each other in a dark, twisted landscape. One night, she received a message from an unknown player offering her a challenge. Beat him in a one-on-one match, and he'd give her a rare in-game item. Intrigued, Lena accepted. The match started normally enough, but soon she realized this player wasn't just skilled. He seemed to anticipate her every move. The atmosphere in the game became suffocatingly tense, and Lena's nerves frayed as the match dragged on. Finally, the player cornered her in the game, sending a final message. "You lose." The screen went black, and then her computer shut down. Lena tried to restart it, but it wouldn't boot. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a text. Game over. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked around her room, now dark and eerily silent. The game wasn't just over. It had followed her. It had followed her into the real world. Story 8. The NPC. In a small town, there was a local legend about a cursed arcade machine that showed up at random locations. Sam didn't believe in such stories, but when the arcade machine appeared in the back room of his favorite gaming cafe, he couldn't resist giving it a try. The game, a simple 8-bit platformer, seemed innocent at first. But as he played, Sam noticed something disturbing. The NPCs weren't following their programmed paths. Instead, they were watching him, their pixelated eyes tracking his every move. The more he played, the more the game seemed to change, almost as if it was alive. Suddenly, one of the MCs broke the fourth wall, speaking directly to him. "You shouldn't be here." Sam tried to exit the game, but the machine wouldn't let him. The screen filled with static, and then a new message appeared. "You are the NPC now." The screen flickered, and Sam found himself trapped in the game. His own face now trapped in the game. His own face now a pixelated character among the others, forever wandering the cursed digital world. Story 9. The Mode. Kyle was part of a thriving online modding community, creating custom content for a popular horror game. One day, he received a private message from another modder with a link to a file titled Donatopen, exe. Against his better judgment, Kyle downloaded and installed the file. The game loaded as usual, but everything felt different, darker, more sinister. As he explored the game world, he noticed new areas and characters that he hadn't created, all of them twisted and grotesque versions of the original content. Then, a character resembling Kyle's in-game avatar appeared, but its face was distorted, eyes hollow. It started following him, leaving eerie messages on the screen. "You're next." Panicking, Kyle tried to uninstall the mod, but it wouldn't delete. His computer began acting up, files disappearing and reappearing with corrupted names. Finally, his screen went black, except for one last message. "I'm inside now." The lights in his room flickered, and Kyle felt an overwhelming sense of dread as he realized the mod had breached more than just his game. Story 10. The Mirror Game. Lucy had always been a fan of horror puzzles, so when she found an obscure game called The Mirror on a dark web forum, she couldn't resist. The game was simple. You played in front of your webcam, and the game mirrored your movements. At first it was fun, watching her character mimic her actions on screen. But then the game started adding small delays, making the mirrored image just slightly off. Sync. Next, but then the game started adding small delays, making the mirrored image just slightly off. Sync. Next, the reflection began to do things Lucy wasn't. Blinking when she didn't. Smiling when her face was expressionless. The changes were subtle at first, but they grew more noticeable and disturbing. Lucy tried to close the game, but it wouldn't shut down. Her reflection on the screen leaned closer, its smile widening unnaturally. A message flashed. Let's trade places. Before Lucy could react, the screen went black. When it flickered back on, the figure on the screen was no longer a reflection. It was staring at her as if it was sentient, mimicking her every move in reverse. Panicked, Lucy covered the webcam, but the reflection remained, now moving independently. The reflection's eyes darkened, and it reached towards the screen as if trying to break through. Suddenly, her monitor cracked, and the room's lights flickered. She felt a cold breeze on the back of her neck, and when she looked back at the screen, the reflection was gone. But in the darkness of the monitor, she saw her own face staring back at her. Not from the screen, but from within. Story 11. The Deve's Curse. Marcus was a budding game developer, working late into the night on his first horror game. He was using assets he found online to speed up the process when he stumbled across a strange folder named Forbidden. Curious, he opened it and found a series of creepy sound files, distorted images, and code snippets. Ignoring the ominous warnings in the readme file, Marcus integrated the assets into his game. As he tested the game, strange things started happening. Glitches that weren't supposed to be possible, sounds playing out of nowhere, and characters acting erratically. One character in particular seemed to have a life of its own. It would appear in scenes it wasn't programmed for, staring directly at Marcus through the screen. The longer he played, the more it felt like the game was playing him. Then one night a message appeared on the screen. "You know what you did." But the character began typing on its own, creating new code lines faster than Marcus could delete them. Suddenly the screen went black, and his computer crashed. When it rebooted, Marcus found all his files deleted, except for one. A video file showing his room, recorded from the perspective of his computer screen. The camera panned slowly, settling on the character from his game, now standing behind his chair. Story 12. Disconnected Player. Sophie loved online horror games, especially those where players had to work together to survive. One evening, she joined a game with random strangers, all working to escape from a haunted mansion. As the game progressed, one player stood out, a character who never spoke, never typed in chat, but always seemed to know the right way to go, avoiding traps and guiding the others. The others followed this silent leader, but Sophie started to get a bad feeling. When they reached the final room, the mysterious player finally typed, This is where we part ways. As the others rushed toward the exit, Sophie's screen froze. When it unfroze, she was alone in the mansion, the lights flickering ominously. Desperate, she tried to reconnect with the other players, but their names had vanished from the list. Then her headset crackled to life with static, followed by a whisper. "You shouldn't have trusted them. You shouldn't have trusted." Her avatar turned on its own, and the screen showed a dark figure standing right behind her in-game character, its hand reaching out to grab her. Sophie ripped off her headset, but the whispering continued, now coming from within her room. Story 13. The Red Room. Late one night, Dan received a strange invitation to a private gaming server. The message simply read, "To join us in the Red Room." Wayne was intrigued but hesitant, having heard of dark web urban legends about sinister games. Curiosity got the better of him, and he joined. The game started in a dark, empty room with red walls and a single door. The objective was unclear, and there were no other players visible. As Dan explored, he heard faint whispers and saw shadows moving in the corners of his screen. The door opened on its own, leading him deeper into a maze of identical red rooms, each more disturbing than the last. The whispers grew louder, forming words. "We see you." Suddenly Dan's webcam light turned on, and a live video feed of his own face appeared in the corner of the screen. The game began typing on its own. There's no escape. Panicked, Dan tried to exit the game, but every attempt failed. The rooms began to distort, the red walls closing in around him. As the whispers turned into screams, the screen went black, leaving only the words, "Welcome to the Red Room. You're here forever." Dan never touched his computer again, but the words remained burned into his mind. Story 14. The Ghost in the Machine. Evan was a tech-savvy gamer, always tinkering with old hardware. One day, he found an ancient gaming console at a flea market, complete with a collection of dusty cartridges. The console was unlike anything he'd seen before, with no brand name or markings. When he powered it on, the screen flickered with static before a game started on its own. A crude, 8-bit horror game. As Evan played, the game seemed to glitch in strange ways, with characters disappearing and reappearing in odd places. Then, messages began appearing on the screen, spelling out words in the static. "Help me." Evan tried to reset the console, but it wouldn't turn off. The game began to pixelate violently, the graphics distorting into terrifying images that looked too real for such an old system. Suddenly, the game froze on a scene of a crying child, trapped behind bars. A voice whispered through Evan's speakers, soft and mournful. "I'm stuck. Please free me." The screen flashed and the console shut down on its own. When Evan tried to turn it back on, the console was completely dead. But from that night on, he could hear faint, static-filled cries emanating from the console whenever he walked by, as if someone was still trapped inside, forever haunting the machine. Story 15. The Glitched Avatar. Mia was obsessed with customizing her avatars in online games, always striving for the most unique look. One day, she discovered a secret customization option in her favorite horror game, hidden deep within the game's code. The option was labeled Glitch Mode. Curious, Mia activated it, and her avatar began to distort in bizarre and unsettling ways. Limbs stretching unnaturally, eyes shifting out of place, and textures glitching into dark, twisted patterns. At first, she was fascinated by the creepy appearance, but soon strange things started happening. Other players began avoiding her in the game, some even logging off as soon as they saw her. Then, the game's NPCs started to react to her avatar as if it were alive, whispering in distorted voices whenever she approached. One night, as she played, her avatar began moving on its own, performing actions she hadn't commanded. The screen flickered and the game froze. When it resumed, Mia was no longer in control. The avatar was guiding her through the game, visiting areas she'd never seen before. A message appeared on the screen. "Welcome, host." Mia felt a sudden coldness in her room, and the lights flickered. The game's music warped into a sinister tone, as her avatar turned to face her, grinning eerily. From that night on, Mia couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong with her computer, and no matter what game she played, she would always see her glitched avatar staring at her from the shadows. Story 16. The Final Level. Ben had spent months grinding through a notoriously difficult horror game, determined to reach the fabled final level that few had ever completed. Rumors circulated online about this level, claims that it was cursed, that it drove players insane. Ben dismissed these as just urban legends, determined to beat the game. Finally, one night he reached it. The screen faded to black, then a message appeared. "You're not ready." Ignoring the warning, Ben pressed on. The level was unlike anything he'd seen before, an endless maze of dark, twisted corridors filled with whispers and shadows that seemed to flicker just out of sight. The game's usual mechanics were gone, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. As Ben navigated the maze, the whispers grew louder, more coherent, until they formed words. He turned back, but he kept going, the screen beginning to glitch with distorted images. Then, the whispers turned into screams, and Ben's character was suddenly pulled into a black void. A final message appeared. You were warned. The game crashed, and Ben's computer shut down. When he restarted it, the game was gone, as if it had never existed. But from that night on, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he was still in the game, wandering through the dark corridors of his own mind. Story 17. The High Score. Lucas was known for setting high scores in every game he played. His latest obsession was an old-school arcade game he'd found in a dusty corner of a local bar. The game was simple. Guide a character through a haunted house, avoiding ghosts and collecting treasures. Lucas quickly became addicted, determined to beat the highest score on the leaderboard, which belonged to someone named Shade. As Lucas got closer to breaking the record, the game started to change. The ghosts became more aggressive, and the house's layout began to shift in ways that defied the game's logic. On the night Lucas finally surpassed Shade's score, the game screen flashed red, and the music warped into a dissonant, terrifying tune. A new message appeared. You've taken my place, taken my place. You've taken my plaque, and when it came back, the game had reset. Lucas's name was now at the top of the leaderboard, but Shade's name was gone. As he stepped away from the machine, Lucas felt a strange chill, as if someone was watching him. Later that night, he received an anonymous message on his phone. Now I'm free. Enjoy your new score. From that moment on, Lucas found himself haunted by nightmares of the game, where he was trapped in the haunted house, endlessly pursued by vengeful spirits. Story 18. The Abandoned Server. A group of friends loved to play horror games together online. One night, they discovered an old abandoned server for their favorite game. The server had been offline for years, yet somehow it had come back online. Curious and excited, they logged in, only to find that the server was stuck in a permanent state of twilight, with an eerie reddish glow tinting the game world. As they explored, they realized that the NPC in this version were all frozen in place, staring blankly at the players. The usual game objectives were missing, and the only clue was a cryptic message scrawled on a wall. Find the others. The friends began to search, but the more they explored, the more distorted the game world became. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes, the ground cracked, and an oppressive fog rolled in. Then, one by one, the players started to disconnect. Only, it wasn't voluntary. Their avatars would glitch and freeze, then vanish without a trace. Eventually, only one player was left, desperately trying to find an exit. A final message appeared. You're the last. Goodbye. The server crashed, and the player was booted to their desktop. When they tried to reconnect, the server was gone, and so were their friends, their accounts showing as permanently offline. Story 19. The Wrong Game. Riley was bored one evening and decided to browse for new games on an obscure indie site. One game caught his eye. An untitled file with no description, just the word I plain in the thumbnail. Curiosity piqued, he downloaded it. The game began with a blank screen and faint, discordant music in the background. After a few moments, a single sentence appeared. After a few moments, a single sentence appeared. Idris grugged and clicked continue. The game then loaded into a dark, maze-like world with no clear objective. As Riley wandered through the maze, strange things began to happen. The screen would flash unsettling images, and the music would suddenly cut out, replaced by faint whispers. The further he went, the more distorted the game became, with the walls warping and the ground crumbling beneath his character's feet. Then, Riley noticed something disturbing. His own name, address, and personal details were appearing as graffiti on the walls of the maze. Panic set in, but when he tried to exit the game, his computer froze. A final message appeared. "IEG warned you." The screen went black, and when it rebooted, the game was gone, as if it had never been installed. But Riley knew it wasn't over. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The next time, listen." Story 20. The Living Pat. Jake was an avid gamer, always on the lookout for the latest patches and updates. One day he noticed an update for his favorite horror game that wasn't from the official developers. The patch notes were vague, but Jake decided to install it anyway, eager to see what new content had been added. At first everything seemed normal, but soon Jake noticed subtle changes. The game's world was darker, the shadows deeper, and the atmosphere more oppressive. Then Neepsies began to behave strangely, staring at Jake's character with unnerving intensity and muttering cryptic phrases, like "you don't belong here." The game's creatures, once easy to avoid, became terrifyingly intelligent, hunting Jake's character with relentless precision. Then, Jake's screen froze, and a new message appeared. "Do you like the update?" Before he could react, the game resumed, but now Jake's character was trapped in a loop, unable to progress. The NCs began to glitch, their faces distorting into horrifying grimaces as they closed in on his character. The screen went black, and a final message appeared. "This is your game now. Enjoy." Jake's computer crashed, and when he rebooted, the game was gone, replaced by a single file on his desktop named E-Terrified of what might happen next.